You know that voice in your head? The one constantly criticizing your outfit, replaying last week's mistake, and panicking about tomorrow. That relentless self-judgment is actually an evolutionary glitch that has trapped you in a psychological prison. Here's how to finally quiet it down. I want you to picture something wild for a second. Imagine that maybe, just maybe, the greatest achievement of human evolution, our incredible, sparkling, self-aware consciousness, is actually a fundamental mistake. A tragic, cosmic misstep. That sounds awful, right? Like something a movie villain would say. But stick with me. Because the more you look at what makes us us, the more you realize we truly are creatures that, by natural law, probably shouldn't exist. When we ask ourselves what truly separates us from every other creature walking this earth, the immediate answers are usually intelligence, or perhaps complex emotions. A dolphin is smart. A dog feels love and loyalty and fear. A crow can solve complex puzzles. But that's not the core difference. The fundamental, game-changing difference is this: metacognition. It's the second layer. It's the simple, but profound ability to not just think, but to think about thinking. Think about that deer in the forest. It senses a threat. Pure animal fear. And it runs. Its biology takes over. Its sole focus is survival. 5 minutes later, the threat is gone. The adrenaline fades, and the deer is back to grazing. Done. The incident is filed under survival data, not personal flaw. The experience ends when the danger ends. But when a human feels fear, when a human runs or avoids conflict, the experience doesn't end when the danger is gone. The physical danger is replaced by the mental thought. We stop, we catch our breath, and then the brain spins up the second reflective layer. Why did I get so scared? Was I slow? What does that say about me as a person? Did anyone see me flinch? I should have handled that better. That reflection on the self. The judgment, the relentless internal narration, the instant replay with added commentary. That is the defining feature of human consciousness. It's the operating system that runs even when the rest of the world stops. This incredible second layer is a double-edged sword, sharper than anything nature has produced before. On one side, it's responsible for everything magnificent we've ever created. Every piece of art, every philosophical treatise that asked the big questions, every piece of science that peered into the atom or out into the cosmos. It all required us to reflect on ourselves and the universe. We can plan, we can build civilizations, and we can write poetry about a sunset. This is the amazing part of being human. But on the flip side, that very same reflective power is what allows us to feel shame, paralyzing regret, and the crushing, terrifying weight of existential dread. We became smart enough to understand ourselves, to look into the mirror of our own minds and grasp our insignificance in the universe, our mortality, and our flaws. And for a surprising number of us, that piercing self-knowledge is an absolute, constant source of misery. You see this tragic paradox constantly, especially in places like a therapist's office. People come in saying, "I am miserable," and the worst part is, I know exactly why. This constant self-analysis, this awareness of my flaws. What the heck good is it doing me? They are incredibly self-aware, sometimes painfully so. They can analyze their trauma, understand their behavioral patterns, and articulate their deepest fears. And yet, that deep awareness isn't the solution. It's part of the fundamental issue. They're stuck in a loop of analysis, unable to escape the feeling that they are fundamentally flawed, trapped by the voice constantly narrating their life. It turns out, science actually backs up this idea that our self-awareness can turn against us. This isn't just philosophical hand-wringing. It's a measurable process happening inside your head. There's an entire neural system dedicated to running that painful, constant internal monologue. It's what we call the brain's idle mode, and it's the real culprit in this evolutionary comedy. And to understand the nature of the trap, the ego loop, we first have to meet the network that builds it. We just talked about the second layer. That incredible, sometimes agonizing, capacity we have to look in the mirror of our own minds. But where exactly does that internal voice come from? Where is that ceaseless self-analysis actually running? It turns out there is a specific measurable part of your brain that handles all this self-talk. Neuroscientists call it the default mode network, or the DMN. Think of the DMN as your brain's idle mode. You know how your computer hums along, running background processes and checking updates, even when you aren't actively typing anything or engaging with a program? The DMN is essentially that behavior for your mind. It's the neurological baseline. This network becomes highly active when your mind is relaxed, when you're not concentrating fiercely on the outside world. Maybe you're driving a familiar route, or sitting quietly and waiting for a friend, or perhaps you're just standing in the shower. This downtime is when the DMN kicks into high gear. It's the engine for every internally focused thought you have. Daydreaming, recalling personal memories, constructing elaborate scenarios about the future, and crucially, self-reflection. The DMN is, in essence, the physiological location of your internal identity. It's what weaves together your past experiences, your potential future fears, and your present insecurities into that single, continuous, highly complex entity we call you. It is literally the part of your brain that ensures you know who I am. Without it working smoothly, our sense of self fractures. Now, this system is absolutely necessary for things like complex planning, creativity, and moral reasoning. But here is where that evolutionary mistake comes into play. Because the DMN is designed to focus inward, it's always prioritizing the needs, status, and survival of the self. Let's go back to our feathered friend for a moment. A bird spends its day looking for food. It checks 10 spots and finds nothing. Does it perch on a branch, despairing, and think, "Wow, I am a failure of a bird. My camouflage is inadequate. My foraging strategy is fundamentally flawed and my worth is zero?" Of course not. It just keeps looking. Its brain stays focused on the external task, not the internal self. It operates outside of a self-judgment loop. But us? Oh, we are deeply, profoundly different. If I apply for 10 jobs or try to sell 10 products or approach 10 people, and they all reject me, I don't just move on to number 11 without a second thought. My brain, specifically my DMN, immediately goes into frantic overdrive. It stops focusing on the external problem, the bad luck, the poor timing, the market saturation, and immediately starts focusing on the internal I. I start thinking, maybe I'm fundamentally unlovable. Maybe I'm not smart enough. I'm a terrible judge of character. I should have worked harder in college. This happens without conscious instruction. The internal narrator, the DMN, has hijacked the situation and made it all about you. Our self-awareness, as miraculous as it is, has a dangerous flaw. The same powerful system that allows us to reflect on past mistakes and learn from them can, just as easily, turn viciously on us. Because once you can think about yourself, once you have that robust, dedicated internal narrator, you also gain the ability to judge yourself. And if that self-judgment loop gets too active, too loud, too constant, that's when things break down. That's where the crippling anxiety and the inescapable misery our ancestors never truly knew are born. When your brain gets stuck in self-awareness mode all the time, constantly zooming in on your losses, your failures, and your regrets, you're not just reflecting, you are trapped. And that trap, that endless self-centering cycle of the I, is exactly what we need to break out of. We all have this powerful inner narrator, but knowing what it is isn't enough. You need a practical strategy to manage it before it locks you into the destructive ego trap. If you're ready to stop fighting your thoughts and start making real, measurable change in your life, I've laid out the entire 30-day action plan for you. Grab my ebook, 30 Days to a Better You. It's a structured process designed to quiet your default mode network and transform self-awareness into self-mastery. Click the link in the description right now to start your journey. We've met our internal narrator, the default mode network. It's supposed to help us plan, reflect, and learn. But what happens when that narrator refuses to shut up? What happens when it becomes less of a helpful guide and more of an obsessive, hypercritical judge? That's where the misery really sets in. That is the moment we fall headfirst into the ego trap. In psychological distress. In the crushing cycle of anxiety and depression. Your brain is essentially stuck in the highest setting of self-awareness mode. It's like the DMN's volume knob has been glued to max, constantly zooming in on the you. Your losses, your failures, your regrets, your perceived deficiencies. It all circles back to I. I'm worthless. I messed up. My life is a series of my poor decisions. The self-focus becomes constant, suffocating, and impossible to ignore. And here's the truly wild and incredibly insightful part of this mechanism. The person who thinks they are God's gift to humanity and the person who thinks they are a complete failure often have the exact same underlying problem. They are both equally violently trapped by their own ego. Think about it logically. Try to convince a deeply narcissistic person that they aren't the best thing to ever happen to the world. It's impossible, right? Their ego has built an impenetrable wall of self-importance. Now try to convince someone with crushing low self-esteem that they aren't a total loser. That's also impossible. They have equally firm, unwavering conviction in their absolute worthlessness. Why? Because both extremes are driven by the same mechanism, an overactive, entrenched sense of I that dictates reality. The ego, the self-focused narrator, is running the entire show, just pointing its spotlight in opposite directions. Inward toward self-hatred or outward toward self-aggrandizement. The core mechanism is identical. It's the constant self-focus that is the prison. Now, let's talk about a particularly cruel twist of the brain. The smarter you are, the more analytically gifted you are, the deeper you can dig yourself into this trap. Why? Because the ego, our primitive self-protection system, knows exactly how to hijack logic. Here's how the cycle often starts. A trigger happens. Maybe someone ignores your text messages, or a relationship ends, or your boss criticizes you unfairly. You feel disproportionately hurt and rejected. That's step 1, the emotional trigger. Step 2, your ego instantly steps in to protect its fragile sense of self-worth, demanding an airtight, logical explanation for the pain. Your ego marches up to your brilliant intellect and essentially says, "Hey, this feeling is awful. This cannot be my fault. I need you to come up with some bulletproof logic explaining why they are the problem or why our failure was inevitable and unavoidable." And your amazing, loyal brain goes, "Yes, sir. On it, boss." And that's when your high IQ starts working against you. Your brain starts building these elaborate, airtight, emotionally charged arguments that feel perfectly logical. You can explain in sophisticated detail why you are doomed, why you are unlovable, and why you will inevitably fail in the future. What's happening isn't the objective truth. It's your ego ruthlessly misusing your intellect to build a fortress around its pain. This is why intelligent, reflective people often struggle the most. They have the mental horsepower to construct the most convincing, difficult-to-escape prisons for themselves. They are victims of their own rationalizing genius. So, the question isn't how to think better thoughts, because the moment you try to fight the ego, you just feed it more attention and fuel for the next argument. The real challenge is finding the door to that prison. We need to shut down the brain's internal lawyer, stop the narration, and finally break the constant, suffocating self-focus. We've established that our spectacular human intelligence often turns against us, forging an inescapable prison built from relentless self-judgment and rationalized pain. We're stuck in the ego trap, powered by an overactive default mode network. So how do we get out? How do we silence the narrator without trying to shout over it? The first, most tempting approach is always the wrong one, fighting the ego. When that voice says, "You're worthless," we instinctively try to argue back. "No, I'm not. Look at this list of accomplishments. I'm great." But here's the sneaky genius of the ego trap. Arguing with the negative thought just gives it exactly what it craves: attention. You are fully engaging the default mode network, feeding the loop, and providing your rationalizing brain with new material for the next argument. You simply cannot win a screaming match against the voice in your own head, because you're currently both the arguing participant and the captive audience. The real solution is utterly counterintuitive, but it's backed by some surprising clues in neuroscience. Think about how severe, treatment-resistant psychological suffering is being approached in research today. Things like ketamine-assisted therapy and psilocybin-assisted therapy are gaining significant attention. What do these modalities seem to have in common? They all appear to temporarily do the same thing. They quiet down the default mode network. They dampen the hyperactive hub that runs the constant I narrative. I am absolutely not suggesting taking illegal substances, but the observed mechanism is the profound lesson here. When that endless self-looping system is temporarily shut off, your brain gets a short, crucial break from being stuck in you. You experience a kind of temporary dissociation, a feeling of being outside yourself, and in that short window, you realize something liberating, that the narrative of your ego, your flaws, your past mistakes, your future fears, doesn't actually matter that much in the grand scheme of things. There is more to life than the constant, suffocating story of your own shortcomings. This systemic break can actually reset how your brain processes your sense of self, creating new, healthier pathways. The good news is you don't need powerful neurochemicals to achieve this reset. You just need to utilize your magnificent consciousness differently. If the goal is to quiet the DMN, the secret is not fighting the ego, but simply observing it. This relies on a profound truth about consciousness. You cannot observe something without changing it. It's the neurological equivalent of the observer effect. Think of your own breathing. Focus on it right now, and automatically, your rhythm and depth will shift. You have brought a subconscious process into awareness, and the act of observing it changes its pattern. The same goes for your thoughts and emotions. When you shine the light of awareness on them, the pattern shifts. Next time you feel a strong, painful emotion, anger, intense jealousy, self-loathing, or shame, you need to pause for a second and watch the mental circuitry activate. Pause. Take a single breath. Create a split second of space between the stimulus and your reaction. Don't reach for your phone. Don't try to solve the feeling, just stop. Notice the emotion. Register the physical feeling of the emotion in your body. Where do you feel the shame? In your chest? In your throat? Watch the trap activate. Now, watch the mental story begin. See the ego activate. Watch your clever intellect get recruited to start building that airtight, rational argument for why you deserve to feel miserable or why the other person is entirely at fault. Just notice it. No judgment, no resistance, no argument. You are simply watching the pattern unfold, like watching a strange, compelling movie on a screen. The moment you see the pattern clearly, it starts to lose its grip. You've shifted your identity from being inside the thought, being controlled by it, to watching it from the outside. That is the real escape from the constant narrator. When you stop identifying with every fear, label, and story your internal narrator produces for you, your mind will finally quiet down. You learn to live with your ego without letting it run the whole show. We learned that the secret to escaping the ego trap isn't fighting the voice, but simply watching it. When we pause, notice the emotion, and watch the ego start its rationalizing routine, something profound happens. We shift from being the prisoner to becoming the observer. But what does life look like after that shift? What's the view from the outside? The view is surprisingly quiet. And honestly, it is profoundly humbling. When you detach and watch your mind, you realize that your default mode network is constantly narrating your life, but it's doing so with temporary labels and fleeting stories. It's like you're finally sitting down to watch a movie where the main character you is perpetually trapped in a never-ending series of manufactured crises. The actor on the screen is crying about their perceived flaws, raging against an injustice, or paralyzed by a fear of the future. But you, the viewer, are sitting back in the theater, popcorn in hand, knowing it's all just fiction. The moment you stop identifying with every label, I am a failure, I am unlovable, I am defined by this mistake, those labels immediately lose their defining power. They cease being permanent, crushing definitions of who you are, and they become what they truly are: temporary, neurological events passing through the vast expanse of your consciousness. And this brings us to the profound, paradoxical freedom that lies in the heart of this practice. The moment you realize you don't matter in the way your ego thinks you do. This doesn't mean you lack purpose or value. It means the exact opposite. It means you realize your inherent value is not dependent on the tiny, anxious, self-obsessed story your ego is constantly spinning. Your ego exists, first and foremost, to protect its little kingdom. The concept of the I. It insists that you are the center of the drama, that every event is a referendum on your worth. But when you realize the I is just a collection of highly edited memories, anxieties, and future projections, suddenly the pressure lifts. All those huge, crushing failures that the DMN magnifies, the rejection, the critique, the perceived social slip-ups, they weren't existential crises that defined your entire being. They were just data points. You are not the center of the universe, and the universe does not stop spinning when you make a mistake. What an enormous, liberating relief. This quieted mind, this realization that the self-story is temporary, allows your deeper, permanent self. Your natural curiosity, your innate compassion, your underlying intelligence, to finally take the wheel. You stop reacting to fear and start responding with intention. Instead of thinking, if I try this, I might fail, and then I will be shamed, which confirms I am worthless. You simply think, this is a problem. let's try this solution. You go back to being like that bird, focused on the task, not the endless self judgment. The ability to act decisively, to learn without paralyzing fear, and to genuinely connect with others blossoms when you stop filtering every single experience through the narrow, high pressure lens of your own personal drama. Your ego will always be there. It's a core feature of the human brain, and it will always try to protect you, often overzealously and inaccurately. But now that you know its game, you can utilize your magnificent human awareness to break the destructive cycle. The goal is not to kill the ego. It is simply to stop letting it be the CEO of your consciousness. By choosing to observe your thoughts instead of identifying with them, you choose freedom. You choose to step out of the ego trap and finally quiet down the endless inner narrator, leaving you space for real, meaningful life.